Siddiq puts the cook to bed, and he begins to have memories of meeting the Alpha. Dante is checked by another doctor and Siddiq assures him that he is fine. Back in the cell, Negan advises Gabriel to speak with restraint about the coming dangers for his people, so as not to cause panic. Gabriel asks if he should lie. No, don't lie, Negan tells him. At the very least, I'm talking about a small strategic omission. Outside, Gabriel orders his men to lock up the walls and double the guards. Suddenly, the same explosion is heard, and Eugene rushes to the radio to contact the Oceanside, demanding to talk to Michonne. At the beach, Kelly and Coney are helping Rachel and other Oceanside residents drag a net when Kelly nearly stumbles over a pile of nets, despite being repeatedly warned about it. Kelly tells Coney that she worries that her gradual hearing loss won't allow her to translate for her. Connie assures her that she will be fine and they should take their deafness as a superpower. Doc suddenly runs in, followed by Daryl. Kelly glances at Connie, hinting that she and Daryl are infatuated with each other, but Connie just rolls her eyes. On the dock and Daryl is looking at the ocean. They talk about how they were at the zoo. Then he was only afraid of birds. Coney approaches and brings Daryl a dog with a note it seems you've lost something. He communicates with her, and she tells him that he speaks with a southern accent. Suddenly, Carol arrives on a boat. She awkwardly greets Ezekiel and quickly moves on to a conversation with Daryl, who hugs her. While they walk around the camp, Carol tells Daryl about her travels. He thinks she's looking for an outlet, but Carol claims she's happy that the past is behind her. Daryl then informs her about the mask he found and asks if she wants to help them in the search, but she refuses, telling him that she came only for a while. Daryl then takes them away on his motorcycle. Daryl and Carol are trying to track down a deer in the woods. They follow him when he stumbles upon one of the boundaries. Daryl stops Carol from shooting the wounded deer while it is being devoured by walkers. Daryl objects that he has crossed the border and they should not pursue him. Carol angrily reminds him that they never agreed on a border. After that, Daryl apologizes and they reconcile. He admits that he doesn't want her to sail away on the boat again, calling her his best friend. Suddenly, the same explosion is heard in the sky. That night, everyone gathers together and agrees to cross the Alpha border to put out the fire and prevent it from burning down the Oceanside. They discover the remains of the satellite and begin to fight the fire. Some use water, others dig the ground to prevent the spread of fire before morning. The water ends when a herd of walkers approaches the group. Standing with their backs to the fire, the group prepares for battle. The group takes its positions and begins to fight off the herd. Several residents of Alexandria are coming to the rescue. Carol uses the walkers' leaking blood to put out the fire. Daryl throws an axe to cut down a tree, and it falls on several walkers. Later, the fire is extinguished, and everyone comes to their senses. Eugene asks Michonne if he can disassemble the satellite into valuable parts, and she reluctantly agrees, forcing everyone to help. Luke dissuades him because of the radiation, but Eugene insists that they are already surrounded by radiation and infected with something that turns them into walkers when they die. Meanwhile, Daryl and Carol walk to a cliff overlooking an empty ravine, where Alpha showed him a herd of whisperers. Carol still wants to leave tomorrow, but Daryl asks her to stay. As he leaves, Carol sees the Alpha coming out of the woods. She raises her head, and they look at each other with anger. In a flashback from 7 years ago, an injured woman wakes up in a wrecked car when several walkers begin to approach her. She tries to escape, but is surrounded and devoured. Among the herd, Dee walks with young Lydia, smeared with blood, to blend in with the crowd. When the walker bumps into Lydia, she drops her headphones and screams. They have to flee and seek refuge in an abandoned hospital, where they find a man in a ski mask. In the present, Alpha and Beta talk about their enemies and the fear they put on them. He says they should come back so they won't be forgotten, but Alpha is doubtful. Beta says he will never doubt her, and sets off to collect walkers for their herd with the help of two sisters. Returning to the past, where, explaining to the masked man that she is her daughter, they do not wish evil, he lets them stay the night. In the present, Beta lures walkers from the gallery. As he and the sisters lead the herd, Frances looks at the sun and begins to behave strangely. Her sister says she needs to focus. In the past, Dee washes Lydia in the bathtub. Lydia is frightened by the sounds of walkers, but Dee insists that she just listen to them. They sort through the supplies and eat. The masked man explains to Dee that he doesn't want to hear her singing and that the sound of the dead is the only sound he never wants to stop. In the present, Frances starts crying in the middle of the herd, which is why several walkers try to attack her. Beta kills them and says she will pay for it. At their camp, Beta throws Frances to the ground and orders the Whisperer to kill her. When she starts screaming that her son is in a better place, Alpha demands that they leave her alone. Beta follows her and says she needs to punish Frances. Alpha angrily tells him not to ask her questions and declares that he will never understand what it's like to lose a child. She then orders him to send Frances to a tent where she will be expected. In the past, Lydia tells Dee that she wants to be like her. Dee is thrilled about it, but asks her to stop calling her mom. Back in the present, Alpha meets Frances in a tent. She orders her to take off her mask and kneel down. Alpha grabs Frances by the head and causes a scream that can be heard throughout the camp, but eventually pardons her. While Frances goes to talk to his sister, another Whisperer asks if they should return to other communities. In the past, Dee walks through the corridors of the hospital and meets several walkers. She starts killing them, and a masked man joins her. After that, he helps Dee to open the carcasses of walkers, so that the blood can be used later. Jokingly, she decides to call him B and claims that it makes her A. When she tries to see his face under the mask, he demands that she leave at dawn and never come back. In the present, Frances tells her sister about how Alpha showed mercy and what it was like to talk to her. Sister Frances says she should forget about her son, how Alpha sacrificed her daughter for the pack. She also hopes that Frances will start behaving better. The next day, Alpha leads a group of Whisperers into the field to gather more walkers. Suddenly, a satellite appears in the sky, and the herd begins to scatter. Frances sees a walker with a baby carrier strapped on, and she begins to have memories of how she abandoned her son. She runs to the Alpha and jumps on her, which enrages the herd. The herd approaches, and the sister pulls Frances away from the Alpha and throws her into the middle of the herd to be eaten. Back at the camp, Alpha asks Sister Frances if she regrets letting her sister die. She admits that she will always be faithful to the Alpha. Beta approaches and asks Alpha why she is calm after losing 3 people and a herd. Alpha, however, claims to be proud of this woman. That evening, Alpha declares the woman a Gamma, and the group praises her. Beta watches jealously from behind. The next day, Gamma asks Beta about his feelings. They both claim that they are empty, as the Alpha wants them to be. Beta then goes in search of Alpha to their old camp. In the past, Lydia wanders around the hospital alone. Dee wakes up and looks for her. She walks into the ward and finds photos of Beta with his face scratched out of all the photos. Beta finds her and gets angry that she's wandering around there. Then she kills a walker in a t-shirt with a smiley face when he comes out of another room. Beta loses his temper and starts destroying everything around. Lydia arrives and eventually stops him from killing Dee. He gets down on his knees when Dee comes up to him and declares, "We are the end of the world." She lifts his mask to look at his face and grins, seeming to recognize him. Beta doesn't want to leave her friend, and she declares that he won't have to, giving him a knife. Beta then begins to cut off his friend's face. In the present, Beta discovers that Alpha made a shrine to Lydia and lied about killing her. Alpha breaks down and says she couldn't have killed her daughter. She then destroys the shrine and begs him to keep Lydia's life a secret. He promises that he will keep it, and informs her that the enemy has crossed the border. Alpha smiles and says they will come back to teach them a lesson. Later, the Whisperers are moving through the forest with their herd when the Alpha notices something in the distance. She steps aside and looks at Carol, watching her from a distant cliff above a ravine that once housed a horde of Whisperers. For the next 49 hours, the residents of Alexandria resist the waves of walkers that have surged through the gates of the community. The group is exhausted, but they manage to kill all the walkers. Recovering from the grueling battle, Michonne checks on her children, although Judith reminds her that it's not safe to sleep. She receives a call on the walkie-talkie and discovers that a new herd of walkers is approaching from different directions. In the morning, residents clear the community of corpses, and Eugene warns that it's an hour until the next wave. Michonne is tired, and Daryl feels her disappointment. Suddenly, Gamma appears at the gate, which tells them to go to the northern border, lay down their weapons and wait. Michonne asks her to recall the walkers, but swears that they are not theirs. She again orders them to go wait for Alpha at the border. At an emergency council meeting, Lydia confirms that her mother is not behind the attacks because she would have sent the whole herd. Margot speaks on behalf of the robbers and demands justice, and Gage wants to put the heads of the Whisperers on thorns. Siddiq has a panic attack and leaves. Daryl confirms that he has seen tens of thousands of walkers in the Alpha stage. Michonne tells everyone that instead of retaliation, she and a small group will meet with Alpha at the border to settle everything. Michonne then develops a plan. Gabriel will lead the group against the North Wave, Aaron will take care of the South Wave, and Michonne will lead the group to the border. Gabriel orders Aaron to take Negan with him to fight alongside him due to the shortage of soldiers at the moment. Meanwhile, Carol hides the revolver in her pants and takes a few pills before heading with the others to the border. In the forest, Negan and Aaron kill several walkers. When Negan finds the crowbar, Aaron demands that he put it down. Negan says he's not the guy he claims to be, but Aaron forces him to keep using the broom to kill the staying walkers. Returning to Alexandria in the evening, Eugene and Rosita fight off a small herd of walkers at the gate. He claims that he can continue killing them, despite her offer to return to the house and rest for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, Daryl, Michonne, Carol and some others stay at the border and lay down their weapons. Alpha stays with several Whisperers and reminds them to stay away from her land. Michonne explains that the fire would have wiped Oceanside off the face of the earth, and they crossed the border only once. But Alpha reminds her of 2 other times when they violated the border. Alpha declares that there will be no bloodshed, and instead announces that he is moving the border as punishment. Carol says they don't have to listen to her nonsense. Daryl tries to persuade her to leave, but Alpha says he won't leave until Carol looks down at her feet. Alpha tells Carol that she should be afraid of her, but Carol replies that she doesn't feel anything at all. Alpha reminds her how Henry was afraid of her before she decapitated him, which causes Carol to pull out a gun and shoot. Michonne manages to hit her in the arm, and she misses while the Whisperers draw their weapons. Michonne apologizes to Alpha for Carol's behavior, and Alpha says he forgives her. Back at the camp, Carol tells Michonne, the bitch has to die. Daryl tells Michonne that she is not the same as before, after the vote. Suddenly Carol notices nearby Whisperers and makes a shot, but misses. Michonne orders the group to capture, not kill them. Elsewhere, Negan destroys a walker with a crowbar, and Aaron demands that he tie himself up. When Negan tries to pull him away, Aaron pushes him to the ground. I did what I had to do then, says Negan about his past actions. Aaron asks why Eric had to die, and Negan tells him that if he doesn't protect what belongs to him, then it belongs to someone else. Aaron replies that if he failed Eric, then Negan failed his wife, and she died hating him. Suddenly, Aaron is attacked by walkers when Negan runs away. He kills them, but the blood makes his eyes blurry. Meanwhile, Michonne doubts Carol's claims and suggests that the pills she is taking are affecting her, but Carol shrugs it off. Then the group stays in an abandoned school to rest. Looking around the room, Carol finds a textbook where, in hallucinations, she sees herself at the head of the table, at which Sophia, Lizzie, Micah, Henry, and Sam are sitting. She decides to keep watch while the group sleeps. Daryl accompanies her and tells the story that his father was a trucker and once he had hallucinations when he saw a girl on the road. He says that staying awake for a few hours can make a person see different things, but Carol dismisses him. Suddenly, her alarm goes off, and she takes pills, despite his persuasions. Returning to the forest, Aaron looks for Negan, but can hardly see. He stumbles upon a hut where Negan waits patiently and hides behind it. Because of his blurred vision, Aaron beats against a hut that walkers have broken into. Negan saves him with a crowbar and tells him that the flowers growing from walkers are called wormwood and can lead to blindness. He gives him water and says they will leave in the morning. At school, Carol continues to look around. In a dark hallway, she hears Henry, then turns around and gets stabbed by a mysterious figure. When she wakes up, she realizes that it was a dream. Daryl finds her and she claims she's fine. Carol insists it doesn't sound like the story of his trucker father, but a confused Daryl says he didn't tell her anything. Her alarm goes off, and she is surprised to find her pills in her pocket, thinking that she threw them away earlier. She tells Daryl she wants to watch for another hour. As he leaves, Carol sees the Whisperer walking down the hallway and follows him. Carol walks into the gym and falls into a trap that traps her upside down. The Whisperer brings a group of walkers to her, and she deals with them, freeing herself. After killing all the walkers, Carol frees herself and gets up when the alarm goes off and everyone enters the room. In Alexandria, Siddiq and Dante tend to Carol's wounds. Siddiq's vision blurs again when he tries to take the equipment to put stitches on her. Dante tells him that he will do it instead. After that, they tell Daryl and Michonne that she's fine. At dawn, Aaron regains his sight and tells Negan that he can finally see. Meanwhile, Eugene and Rosita argue that he is trying to protect her. She shouts that he is not the father of the cook and they will never be together. Eugene admits that he believes that their entire friendship was based on his beliefs that one day he could change her mind and leaves with a broken heart. Outside, Siddiq sees him leaving the house upset until Michonne approaches him. He says he's just tired, and she leaves. Dante brings Siddiq a drink and explains that he was a field medic during the fighting in Iraq. He says he understands what he has to go through, as he also suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. In an idyllic dream, Carol wakes up to the sound of music and sees Daryl cooking in the kitchen. She then sees Henry at the kitchen table, who asks her where she is going. In reality, Carol wakes up and picks up an empty pill bottle. A tear rolls from her eye. When she goes downstairs, she sees that Michonne is waiting for her. She swears she saw the Whisperers, but Michonne says no one else saw them. Michonne returns to her house to relax with her children. Judith is looking after RJ, and Michonne is in bed with them. She explains that everything is safe for now. Later, Carol asks Daryl if he believes her about the Whisperers, and he replies that he does. Returning to school, one of the Whisperers finds himself among the corpses and wakes up revived. This proves that, despite numerous hallucinations, the Whisperers she saw were real. In Alexandria, Daryl joins Michonne and her children and they have lunch together. He then leaves a tray of food outside Carol's room and leaves, and she soon picks it up. Meanwhile, Lydia is strolling through the streets, passing Rosita and Gabriel, who are walking a coat. She smiles at the trembling Siddiq from afar, but he runs back to his house, upsetting her. In the hilltop, Magna and Yumika make love until Ezekiel can't sleep. Suddenly, a giant tree falls through the fence wall onto one of the trailers earlier in the 9 residents. While the residents of Hilt are helping the wounded, Coney assumes that the Whisperers are to blame for everything, and the rest decide where to place the wounded. Yumika orders them to be placed in Maggie's office, ignoring Magna's suggestion. The next morning, residents realize that a small herd has appeared outside the walls of the community. Yumika leads the group outside to fight them off. Meanwhile, Aaron trains the Alexandrians in combat training, while Gage, Margot, and Alfred taunt Lydia and angrily order her to leave. On the way, Michonne leads the column towards Hilltop. She advises Judith never to take her enemies at their word. Judith suggests that the Whisperers are probably trying to tire them out, as RJ does before going to bed, which impresses Michonne. Suddenly, Michonne notices that Ezekiel is driving into the forest alone, and orders the group to continue on their way while she investigates. She goes to the forest and finds Ezekiel on the edge of a cliff contemplating suicide. Michonne hugs him and tells him it's okay, prompting him to kiss her. After a few seconds, he pulls away and apologizes. In Alexandria, Lydia comes to Negan and tells him about her abusers, and Negan advises her not to react. Daryl suddenly appears and orders her to leave. She's just trying to fit in, says Negan. Daryl tells him that this won't happen if he's around her. Then he catches up with Lydia to scold her for talking to him when they notice the inscription silence the whisperer on the door of their house. Back in the forest, Ezekiel jokes to Funny that they could have been together in another universe and reminds her how much he has lost. She admits that she once envied walkers, wishing they would bite her. She also tells him that things get better in the end when she remembers Rick, which makes her cry. Then they return to their horses, and Ezekiel thanks her for her advice and support. In the Alexandria dining room, Lydia is sitting at the table of Gage, Margot and Alfred. To their disgust, she removes the skin from the squirrel in front of them and mimics their shushing. Later, Daryl tells her not to do that anymore, but she defends herself and leaves. That evening Lydia walks and gets ambushed by her abusers. Margot accuses her of putting her friends' heads on spikes, but Lydia reminds them that she had nothing to do with it and says that she is one of them. They throw Lydia to the ground and start beating her brutally. Suddenly, Negan comes to Lydia's aid and throws Margot into the wall. While he defends Lydia, a terrified Gage says they were just trying to scare her. Brendan arrives and they realize that Margot has died after colliding with a wall. Daryl and the residents are staying to assess the situation. Alfred blames Negan for Margot's death, but Lydia shouts that it's not his fault. Daryl believes her, but orders Negan to return to the cell. Siddiq's memories begin again, and he runs to the infirmary to wash his face in a basin of cold water. In the infirmary, Dante finishes dressing Lydia, and Daryl examines her. He tells her that he is sorry that this happened, and she claims that her father would have protected her. Daryl hugs her and she tells him that Negan saved her. Sometime later, Daryl comes to Negan's cell to talk to him. He tells Negan that people want him dead, but Negan claims it was an accident, and Margot was still a bastard for beating up a child. Daryl asks why he helped her, and Negan replies that he believes in their lifestyle. Daryl promises that he will have a chance to tell his version, and leaves. Near his house, he meets Carol in the best condition. She asks what he's going to do with Negan. "I believe her," he replies. Carol reminds him that the real enemy is still out there somewhere and says they should have gone to New Mexico. Back at the hilltop, the group kills as many walkers as they can to protect the walls. Unexpectedly, Michonne and Ezekiel, Judith and the others join the battle. During the fight, Michonne notices Judith single-handedly dealing with walkers, and smiles proudly. In Alexandria, the council holds an emergency meeting with Gage and Alfred, who lie and say they were attacked. Gabriel asks why only Lydia is in the infirmary. They tell how their friends were beheaded by the Whisperers, and now Margot is dead. Meanwhile, Daryl contacts Funny on the hilltop radio to inform her of the situation. Michonne asks if she should go home, but Daryl tells her to stay as long as Hilltop needs her. Michonne tells him that Lydia needs to be protected regardless of the outcome because she believes Alpha will be harsher on them if Lydia leaves, and reminds Daryl that Alpha chose him to be Lydia's protector. She also asks Daryl to be her proxy when voting in the council about Negan. Before signing up, she receives an emergency call from Oceanside. While the council is discussing different opinions, Daryl comes and says that he believes Lydia, which leads to a preponderance of votes. Gabriel announces that he will take the night to make a decision until tomorrow. The next morning at the hilltop, Michonne announces at a meeting that she will go to the ocean site to provide help due to the activity of the Whisperers, and Eugene decides to stay and help fix the wall. She also decides to take Judith with her after she proved herself in battle. When Yumika checks on Magna, she angrily declares that Yumika should stop making decisions for everyone and reminds her that she is no longer her lawyer. Later that day, the group prepares the convoy for departure to Oceanside, and Luke says goodbye to his close friends, deciding to visit Jules. Back in Alexandria, Gabriel discovers that Negan has disappeared from his cell and runs to inform Daryl about it. Later, Gabriel and Aaron are discussing Negan's escape when Lydia walks by and tells them it's her fault. Daryl rushes there and discovers that Lydia has locked herself in a cell. He says he knows she didn't do it because she didn't leave the house that night. However, Lydia prefers to stay in the cell because she feels safer and laments that she cannot be like him. Daryl leaves in sadness, and then begins to wash graffiti off the walls around the community. Kelly is hunting a boar in the forest, struggling with her hearing. She hits the target and saves the boar from suffering when a walker approaches her. Kelly kills him, while others come and devour the boar. She runs through the woods until she stumbles and falls down a hill, injuring herself. The walker silently sneaks up from behind when Kelly loses consciousness. Elsewhere, Negan washes his face in the river while Brandon pretends to hold a knife. He shows that he was joking and throws a flask to Negan. Negan drinks from it and smiles. In the hilltop, Eugene forces people to save every inch of the tree while Alden tells Yumika that they need to strengthen their defenses. She says now is not the time, and Earl complains about the lack of retaliation against the Whisperers. Unexpectedly, Brianna informs Yumika that someone has stolen a crate of fish from Oceanside. In the house, Magna sulks when Yumika comes to tell her to watch the food better, but she only turns up the music and ignores her. Daryl and Siddiq come to tell Aiel that they couldn't find Negan, and coughs and asks Siddiq to help in the infirmary. Hilltop's hunting team also returns, and Coney expresses concern about Kelly's whereabouts. Oscar informs her that she has volunteered to stay and will return later. Coney looks worried, and Daryl is listening nearby. Back in the woods, Negan gets mad at Brandon when he imitates the whistle of the Saviors. Brandon begins to fantasize about the shelter and says that he is angry because Rick Grimes killed his parents. He then claims that he heard Negan shoot Carl. Negan gets angry and corrects him, showing respect to Carl and saying that he would never kill a child. "We're both Negan," Brandon says, seeming to understand him. They continue on their way and find the border of the Whisperers. Before they can investigate, Negan is attacked by a walker. With the help of a wire around his neck, he tears off his head and splits it. He sarcastically thanks Brandon, who tells him that he was preparing another Lucille for him, and also stole his leather jacket from the community. Negan smiles, but asks him to put everything back in the bag because he doesn't want to be recognized. Meanwhile, Aaron is brandishing his sword on the bridge when he hears footsteps. He hides and watches as Gamma cuts up a walker and spills his guts into the river to pollute the water. Elsewhere, Brandon asks Negan to rate female walkers by their sexuality when they suddenly hear screams from the bus. Negan runs inside and stabs several walkers to save the woman and her son. Brandon arrives and praises Negan for his brutal murders of walkers. While searching for Kelly in the woods, Daryl tells Coney the story of how he saved Merlot from drowning while fishing, but was punished for not getting beer out of the lake. Unexpectedly, the dog finds the remains of a boar. They hear a noise behind them and find Magna. Back at Hilltop, Yumika worries that the group is still in the woods, but Alden helps her calm down. When she leaves, Earl tells Alden that the Whisperers will eventually return. Alden replies that he hasn't forgotten what they've lost. In the infirmary, Ezekiel starts coughing violently and shows Siddiq a big lump on his neck. He explains that he had thyroid cancer in his family and knows that he is unlikely to be able to survive his illness due to the lack of proper medical treatment in the modern world. Siddiq offers alternative solutions, but has already resigned himself. On the bus, Amelia shares her story with Negan and Brandon. She then takes her son Mile for a walk when Brandon offers to rob them. Negan stops him and orders him to return to Alexandria. Brandon says he can't go back, then Negan tells him he can go wherever he wants, as long as he doesn't have to see his creepy face anymore. "You're just like everyone else," Brandon says before leaving. In the Whisperer's camp, the Whisperer demands that instead of using walkers for slow strategies, they release their herd onto the community. Alpha allows the group to vote, but no one agrees with him. She suddenly cuts off his leg and he falls. When he tries to stab, she cuts his hand and then hands the knife to Betty to finish the job. Meanwhile, Negan talks to Smiley, who is playing with a toy airplane. He realizes that Milo has never flown on an airplane and explains to him all the joys of flying. He also teaches him the joys of cracking nuts and promises to take him and his mom to the hilltop, where they will be safe. Back in the forest, Gamma walks with the revived Whisperer. She begins to have memories of how she killed her sister, and she begins to inflict multiple blows on the Whisperer's head. As a result, she cuts herself and drops the knife into the water. Aaron appears and throws some bandages. He introduces himself and tries to get her to do the same, but she picks up the bandage and runs away. Elsewhere, Daryl, Coney and Magna find an exhausted Kelly lying under a tree. When they give her water, Kelly insists that Magna tell Daryl and Coney about the supplies they took. Daryl is angry that they are hiding supplies, and Coney suggests they lie and say they found them in the woods. Meanwhile, Negan returns with wood for the fire when he hears Brandon whistling. He discovers that Brandon killed Amelia and Maya. Brandon smiles and asks if he passed the test, assuming that's what Negan wanted him to do. Enraged, Negan takes a rock and angrily hits Brandon on the head. Then he takes his bat and leather jacket and leaves alone. Later that day, Daryl and the others return to Hilltop with Kelly. Siddiq calls Dante on the radio, who informs him that Rosita has caught a bug. He says he'll be back in Alexandria tonight, and then asks to talk to Carol. And Ezekiel sits down in front of the radio, but at the last moment changes his mind and turns it off. Yumika asks Magna about the stolen supplies. They begin to argue, and Magna admits that she really killed the man who injured her cousin, despite the fact that Yumika believed her innocent all these years. Yumika is offended by this revelation and asks her to sleep elsewhere. At the camp, Gamma confesses to Alpha that Aaron gave her a bandage for the wound. Alpha pushes her away and orders her to sit down, after which he removes the mask from Gamma. They discuss the sacrifices, and Gamma tells her that her sacrifice was much bigger, meaning Lydia. Alpha says that Aaron can be useful for her plans. Back at Hilltop, Daryl is preparing to leave when Horse apologizes for dragging him into Kelly and Magna's lies. He understands because they are her family. Then she admits that she also considers him her family. Meanwhile, Negan prowls through the forest and gets to one of the borders. He shouts to attract the attention of the Whisperers, and a group of walkers begins to surround him. When he starts smashing their heads, he is suddenly thrown to the ground by Beta. "Okay, you're a freak, let's do it," Negan says defiantly to Betty, smiling. Carol wakes up in her room. She rinses her face, gets dressed, makes tea, packs a bag and sets off. Before she leaves, she thinks about her gun in her desk drawer. Daryl sees Carol leaving and catches up with her, asking where she is going. Carol replies that she wants to do another search for Negan, and Daryl offers to go with her. She reluctantly agrees. During the trip, they discuss the possibility that Negan will cross the border and join the Whisperers. Carol stops in a clearing near the border with the Whisperers and takes out binoculars. When Daryl asks her about the true reason for their arrival, Carol says she wants to find the Alpha Horde and destroy it. In Alexandria, Dante examines Cheryl in the infirmary and jokes with her that she pretends to be sick in order to spend more time with him. Siddiq arrives, and Dante informs him that even more residents have fallen ill, but he thinks it's nothing serious. Then he tells Siddiq to take a day off and spend it soon, after which he makes an inappropriate joke about Rosita. Siddiq reminds him of the boundaries. Back in the woods, Carol tells Daryl that she has been tracking the movement of walkers along the border and that they all come to the area where they are now. She wants to observe the clearing for the activity of the Whisperers and find out where they are taking the walkers. Daryl warns that they won't be able to track them without starting a war, but Carol claims that they will only watch them and report to the Alexandria Council before doing anything. Daryl asks why she lied to him about their mission. Carol replies that she didn't want him to worry about her after she pointed a gun at Alpha, and apologizes. She asks Daryl if he will stay here, and he confirms, claiming that she will need him for surveillance. Elsewhere, Beta and the Whisperers accompany Negan blindfolded through the forest. He makes fun of their lifestyle and says he wants to join them. Beta presents his knives to Negan's throat and says he is too loud. Negan apologizes and introduces himself, after which he explains that he has been a prisoner of Alexandria for 8 years and is ready to reveal their secrets. Beta agrees and shuts up Negan while they continue walking. At the hilltop, Eugene finishes perfecting a radio made from parts of a fallen satellite while Navila brings him supplies. Then he tests the walkie-talkie and Rosita from Alexandria contacts him and admits that she missed talking to him. Suddenly, part of the walkie-talkie goes out of order, and they agree to talk later. In the woods, Daryl and Carol pass the time by throwing acorns into a jar. Daryl hits her, but Carol says he has to knock her down. Carol finds an acorn with a double hat and gives it to Daryl, saying that it is for luck and can improve his sight. He puts it in his vest pocket. Carol then asks how things are going at the hilltop. Daryl replies that Ezekiel sends his regards to her. When Carol asks him how the horses are, Daryl replies that there is nothing between them. Carol asks him why not and says he can't hide with his dog forever, but he doesn't answer. They are having dinner, and then they notice a group of walkers wandering in circles, and quickly come to the conclusion that there is a whisperer among them. In the camp of the whisperers, Alpha and Beta are arguing about what to do with Negan. The Alpha wants to test him, to kill him about it. Alpha notices that he's been asking her questions quite often lately, and asks if he's challenging her. Beta kneels in submission and swears that he will never challenge her. Alpha forgives him, and Negan smiles next to him. Later, Negan makes fun of Beta's relationship with Alpha and jokes that he is attracted to her baldness. Back in Alexandria, Siddiq arrives at Rosita's house and finds her sick, lying on the couch. He decides to take her to the infirmary, despite her objections. At the hilltop, Eugene decides to contact through open channels to find someone. Later that day, Daryl and Carol discuss how they are going to deal with the Alpha horde. She goes to the bathroom, and Daryl examines her bag. She comes back and asks if he found what he was looking for. He asks her about the gun, but she insists she didn't take it with her. In the forest, Beta forces Negan to complete a series of tasks, such as digging graves, skinning walkers, and helping hunt wild boar to prove his worth. Back in Alexandria, Siddiq comes to the infirmary and discovers that it is full of patients, and scolds Dante for letting the situation get out of control. Rosita calms him down, and he hurries to prepare medicines from herbs. That night, Carol and Daryl approach the border to watch the herd. Back at his camp, Beta tells Negan that he has not earned the right to eat with them, and throws him to the ground. Negan gathers his strength and sits down with another whisperer, who share food with him. In the hilltop, Eugene continues to call on the radio, and after a while a woman answers him. He's speechless. In the woods, Daryl and Carol watch the herd from the bushes. When Daryl signals Carol to retreat, she accidentally steps on a branch and attracts walkers. Meanwhile, Eugene asks the woman about her surroundings, but she says she is still uncomfortable sharing this information. Instead, they agree to talk about their past. Eugene says he grew up in Dallas, Texas, and she grew up in Strasbourg, Pennsylvania. He admits that he came to the city for a railway fair and went to an ice cream parlor. She happily admits that she is also a big fan of this store. In the woods, Daryl holds a walker, cuts his guts and wipes his face with blood to blend in with the crowd and not be discovered. In the infirmary, Siddiq comforts the bedridden Cheryl and apologizes to Dante for his outburst. He says he understands his concern and they laugh about the incident. Some time later, Siddiq hugs the cook and falls asleep. He begins to dream about a terrible night in the barn, and when he wakes up, he finds that he is holding Coco at the windmill, which confuses him. Elsewhere, Beta and Negan are walking in the woods among one of the herds as his last assignment. When Negan starts joking again, Beta tells him that he will never be one of them because he is too loud and narcissistic. "I'm not here for you, I'm here for Alpha," says Negan. In response, Beta kills the Whisperer who shared food with Negan and leaves, leaving Negan alone with himself with a penknife. In the woods, Daryl finds Carol holding a Whisperer hostage. Carol claims that she had no choice, since the Whisperer noticed her, and offers to interrogate him. When she picks up the Whisperer, Daryl notices that his hands are tied with a zipper, and wonders where Carol got the zippers, because they weren't in her bag. Carol claims Daryl must not have noticed them. Then they leave in the direction of Alexandria. Back at Hilltop, the woman confesses to Eugene that she doesn't know if they should continue the conversation because they may pose a threat to each other. Eugene says he trusts her enough to tell her his full name and offers to continue the conversation. She agrees, but wants to keep them a secret between them, and if she hears someone else, she will stop responding. Eugene accepts her terms, and they part ways. The next morning, Beta returns to the camp and tells Alpha that Negan died because he was weak. Suddenly, a blood-covered Negan appears, demanding a jumpsuit with an extra measure for himself because of his huge balls. He kneels down and introduces himself to the Alpha. "I'm all in, everything you want, everything I have is all yours," Negan tells her. The Alpha bends down to sniff him and shushes him in approval. Siddiq wakes up after terrible memories of how the Alpha kills his friends in the barn, and remembers the phrase "open your eyes," said to him. Watching his patients, he hallucinates that he sees an Alpha outside the window in her outfit from the fair. At night, Siddiq reads medical books and takes notes until he falls asleep. Then he imagines waking up to several hands grabbing him from under the sofa and covering his mouth. The next day, Lydia is trying to read a book in her cell when Daryl arrives and signals her to get out while Carol escorts the captured Whisperer inside. Outside, Carol asks Lydia about the new prisoner, and she replies that he is one of the Whisperers in charge of grazing walkers. Carol also asks if he knows where the Alpha Horde is, and Lydia replies that she does. Gabriel approaches and scolds Carol for risking the safety of the community by taking a hostage. Then he orders the Whisperer's wounds to be treated first and demands to be present during the interrogation. At home, Daryl puts down a double acorn and takes off his shirt. Then he cuddles with his dog on the couch. On the balcony, Lydia tells Carol that she doubts that he will betray Alpha because he is loyal, but if they show him that a place like Alexandria can survive, then Alpha can do nothing to stop the spread of this idea among the group. Siddiq and Dante return to the cell to treat the Whisperer's wounds. After Dante ordered him not to do anything, the Whisperer tells Siddiq that he remembers him from the barn and begins to mock him. Siddiq begins to get nervous, and Dante invites him to go outside. When he leaves, Siddiq looks at the sharp spikes on the stairs and remembers how the Alpha brutally beheaded the DJ in front of his eyes. Meanwhile, Aaron and Gamma meet at one of the boarders on the bridge. She asks where such supplies as bread come from in his community. He offers her some, but she refuses. Then Gamma notices a drawing of Gracie in his bag, and he tells her that he has a daughter. She is surprised that there are children in the community, and explains that children are holding you back. When Aaron asks about siblings, Gamma lies and tells him that she is an only child. Back in Alexandria, Carol brings the Whisperer a tray with a sandwich and offers him any taste he wants, as well as salted fish for lunch. When she says she just wants to talk, the Whisperer refuses, so she just hands him the bread. He slowly begins to eat it until he is overcome by emotions. Suddenly he spits it all out on Carol's face. In the infirmary, Siddiq takes care of the bedridden Rosita, and the two of them reflect that in the new world they will become parents. He almost kisses her until she has a coughing fit and he gives her more water, after which he goes to check on other patients. Back in the cell, Carol presses her finger to the Whisperer's wound, demanding to know where the Horde is. When the Whisperer hints that he would rape her if they were in nature, Carol puts on a ring and strikes him several times in the face. "You're all weaklings," he tells them back. Daryl pulls out a knife and threatens to cut off his fingers, ears and teeth. The Whisperer says that they are deceiving themselves, and he will not betray Alpha, because she loves her people so much that she sacrificed her own daughter. Carol runs out of the cell, and Daryl catches her, begging her not to involve Lydia, because she has already suffered enough. "It's the only way out, and you know it," she says in response. Meanwhile, Siddiq checks on Cheryl again in her own bedroom. She invites Siddiqo to her place and they talk about how he should stay strong for the sake of others. On the bridge, Aaron tells Gamma that she can leave the drawing, and tries to ask her about the past, but she does not answer. Then he talks about his younger brother and tries to get the same from her. Without waiting for an answer, Gamma leaves, repeating to himself the motto of the Whisperers. Back in the cell, the Whisperer shivers and talks to himself. When the group enters the cell to help him, he begins to convulse and spits blood on Dante's shoulder, after which he succumbs to the poison and dies on the floor. Carol and Lydia enter the room, but Daryl tries to block their view and forces them to leave. Then Siddiq finds a jar of the drug in a medical backpack and accuses Dante of his murder. However, Dante lies and says that he packed the jar.